he had a shipwreck. He was a dye seller. He sold a very expensive dye, the purple. Um, Dyes are very important to the Stoics. I'll get into that one of these days. But he had a shipwreck. He goes to the marketplace. He picks up a book, scroll probably, and he reads it, and it's Xenophon's Memorabilia of Socrates. And he goes, "Hey, where can I?" This is the story. He says, "Where can I find more of this stuff?" And the bookseller goes, "Oh, there's one of those philosophers right there," and he points to Crates.
All right.
And he studied with Crates for a while, and I think he went to a smaller school that isn't much talked about. The what is it? The Megarian school, which is a school that really focused on logic. And then he went to Plato's Academy for a while. Yeah, I don't think he studied with. It was much after Plato, but he studied at the academy. So Stoicism is kind of like a syncretic form. He kind of mushed all these together, and then um, he got the logic from the Megarians. He got some ideas from Plato. I don't know exactly what he pulled out from Plato, and then he got the idea that virtue is the only good from the Cynics. Crates was a Cynic.
Not from Socrates.
Well, he read Socrates. The Cynic, all those were so the Cynics and Plato were both Socratic schools. They come out of Socrates. So ultimately, yes, Socrates. And they look back to Socrates and pulled him out.
I asked the question because I have come to understand that all of these schools, the Epicurean school, the Plato's Academy itself, and later Aristotle, and the Cynic school, Antisthenes, basically Antisthenes. So all of these schools were born out because Socrates is supposed to be the first person who said virtue is the sole good.
Yeah.
So all of these schools took that idea, some part of that idea and that statement, and took it to their logical extremes. Antisthenes took
Yeah.
what do I call it? The ascetic way of life. The Cynics took that, and then Diogenes came in and they went to all of that. Live in accordance with nature and everything like that, which the Stoics with the Zeno adapted. As I've come to understand, all of these schools had this core idea at their basically at their center, which was virtue is the sole good.
I don't want to go that far. Plato's ideas of virtue are complicated. Aristotle, who was Plato's student, of course, would say that virtue is a good. It is necessary to have a good life, but it is not the only good. The Stoics really ran with the idea, that virtue is the only good. They're the ones who most exemplify that aspect of Socrates.
Not even the Cynics.
The Cynics also did that, but they did it in a different way.
Because virtue, the definition of virtue changed.
Yeah, like the Cynics were like they had some writings, but they were ascetics. They basically a lot of what they did was call out people like on their hypocrisy.
Absolutely.
And we're like, you can be a good person with absolutely nothing. And the Stoics took that idea that virtue is the only good and said, okay, but some of these things are we'll get into the idea of the indifference.
Exactly.
Some things aren't good, but we like them, or some things aren't bad, but we dislike them. And those are called preferred indifference and preferred or dispreferred indifference. And that's indifferent with a T, not indifference like I don't really care. It's a categorization of like worth, if that makes sense.
So how can you take everything? How did the Stoics do it? That is the part I really want to understand. How do you take everything in life and give it
Mhm.
a status? Because you cannot quantify it.
Yeah. So it comes from Socrates, originally, that virtue is the only good.
Correct.
And if you think of virtue as knowledge or a skill and not just a character trait, um, it is how to properly use these things that we have: wealth, our life, sickness, death. How do we use these things to make them good? Like, these things aren't good, but we use virtue to make them beneficial to others.
Keep coming back to the idea of the good,
Yeah, the good life. Yeah,
the good life. So
the eudaimonia.
eudaimonia, correct. So the question is, what is the good life? Because as I understand, and we have discussed this a lot of times, and we have raised the members have raised this issue a lot of times, that good and bad keep changing through the times.
Yeah,
One of the things,
that's a relativistic idea that good and bad change over time. Yeah, that's I don't agree with that.
you don't agree with it. I have, because one of the biggest arguments we have against Stoicism and against the Roman thinkers and the Greco thinkers is that they abided by slavery.
Yeah,
A modern Stoic, even someone with a big S Stoic, who's following the ancient school, would not abide by slavery. So
right.
good and bad have changed through time, a little, maybe not as fluently, maybe not as transiently as I'm making them out to be.
Yeah, slavery is a rough one because we have to get into a little bit of stuff. Slavery in ancient times was the economic engine of basically all cultures.
Mhm,
They didn't have wage labor, not really,
mhm,
like we do today.
mhm,
Not in that same sense. So what they had were slaves, and slavery is bad. And I want to make sure that's I'm going to say that slavery is bad, was bad, always was bad. But it was the economic engine of the ancient world. Um, I personally believe that we have seen that oil extraction is bad.
mhm,
Fossil fuels are bad,
mhm.
or at least the way that we use them today.
Pollution.
But it is the economic engine of our world, and we can't get out of it. Like we seemingly can't get out of it. There's ways out of it, and I think in the future we will find a way. I want to make something very clear here.
Please.
Oil is a thing. Slaves were people, and so therefore slavery is actually bad. The Stoics did think that slaves had their place in society, but they were human beings. That's not true of all Romans or Greeks. So we already have like a little, maybe not enough. We do have ideas that um, slavery was bad and Stoics shouldn't have a slave. Um, so, is it perfect? No. But we also have people who are like, you know, I should not drive my car as much. you know,
I get it.
so people try, but they still have to live.
I understand. But the
Yeah.
implication that we draw from this discussion, which basically comes down to ancient times, economic engine, slaves were the economic engine. They could not do away with them, so they tolerated what was happening. Not
Yeah.
so much as tolerated as it was a given.
Right.
It was an ongoing struggle, as
Right.
is today's struggle of finding
Right.
alternatives to oil.
Yeah.
And they must have had people who were against it. We have people who we call environmentalists who are against the use of fossil fuels.
Right.
So my question is, does that mean that our theory of virtue ethics has a caveat to it that if it is essential to the survivability of the entire human race, then it is something that we must tolerate in our time? Does a little evil today equate to a lot of good in the future?
There's two things. So in this world here today, or back then, whatever, everything, all the indifference, they are necessary. So it's not a necessary evil. It's just that's the only way that this stuff can happen. Okay. That's that's a hard pill to swallow. It's a hard pill for me to swallow. But those things just had to kind of be. And then the virtuous person realizes this and says, okay, this is the material I have to make a virtuous life out of. And it might suck, but it's still good.
To a degree.
As it's as good as it can get right now. My job is to make it better. There's no other way it could have been.
Yeah, absolutely.
This world has to suck. It's as good as it can be. My job is to make it better.
Perfect. So, like, what is in my control? My immediate environment, how much fossil fuels I consume, what kind of, how I treat people in the ancient times, how I treat the slaves, how do I give them, do I treat them as my employees, or do I treat them as other people who think they're superior to slaves treat them? And similarly, how do we go about making a better life out of what we have in our control? What can I choose to do, and what can I not choose to do? So that line, as far as we've discussed about this a lot. So as far as I understand, that line is very important. What is in my control? What is not in my control? And that is where the kind of commercial idea of Stoicism starts to seep into the discussion.
We're talking about the dichotomy of control here, which comes from Enchiridion 1. Some things are under my control, some things are not. Things are, I'm going to change it to power. Some things are up to us, some things are in our power. It depends on the translation. I like up to us. Some things are up to us, some things are not. The things that are up to us, the things that we have responsibility for, the things that we can do, like that we are responsible for, are our aims, our desires, our aims, desires, opinions. There's a fourth one that I'm forgetting right now, but those are very technical things. So aims, what our goals are, what we put ourselves towards, our opinions, and it's not opinion like I don't like chocolate ice cream. Our opinions are like, is this thing good or bad?
All right. Everything is based on
our desires, what we move towards, what we like, what we what we assent to, and our aversions, what we shrink from, what we go, you know. So those things are ultimately up to us. Things like body, health, sickness, death, those are the indifference we were talking about earlier. Those things aren't up to us. We're gonna die. We don't know how we're gonna die. We're gonna live also. We might have some money, we might not. We're definitely gonna get sick. And so those things, but how you use the things that are up to us, we have to decide these things, I'm going to use them in the most beneficial way possible. That includes the stuff that we don't like. We are going to use we're going to handle our poverty, and I'm not a rich guy. We're going to handle our poverty in the most impactful way possible. If we have some wealth, we're going to use it the most benefit for everyone. We're going to use our life in the most beneficial way for us and others. We are going to use our death, if it comes to that, in the most beneficial way. We are not, if we get sick, we're not going to whine about it. We're going to handle it and go, okay, I'm sick. I'm going to stay in bed, or I'm going to go, whatever you need to do. But you're not going to be like, oh, why me? But also, if you're healthy, you're not going to go, yeah, it's because all my decisions. I had a healthy life. Those things are just kind of like just kind of things that happen to you. But what really matters is what goes on in here, what we think about those things.